All right. Well, welcome everybody here this morning. Welcome to anybody that's watching on Facebook. We're glad you're here. And we are going to continue our topic. We began talking about the dispensation of grace last week, and I still have the board up. I didn't really change anything that we had last week. And looking at the Paul said that it was given there in Ephesians chapter. And the purpose of this is, as we read last week in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15, is you study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman need not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And so, rightly dividing the word of truth has to do with dividing it the way God has divided it. And then we looked at last week the books of the Bible. We have Genesis through Malachi, and Matthew through John, and the book of Acts, and then Romans through Philemon, and Hebrews through Revelation, and it's laid out in that order. It's not written, or it's not laid out in the order it was written. It's laid out in the way in which you rightly divide the word of truth. We looked at vision between Old Testament and New Testament, and then between Malachi and Matthew. But Paul here is talking about something that was given to him called the Dispensation of Grace. And it is a change in the way God was dealing with people. And we looked at that in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 1. For this cause, I, Paul, the prisoner of Jesus Christ, for you, the dispensation of the grace of God, which is given me to youward. This was, the dispensation of grace was something that was given to Paul, and it was to Gentiles. It is for you Gentiles. And these are those Gentiles that he talked about it up in chapter 2 that at time past didn't have hope. In fact, look back in chapter 2. In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11, wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision, by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands, that at that time ye were without Christ. Why were they without Christ? He's getting ready to tell you. Being alien and strangers from the hope, and without God in the world. These Gentiles were not part of the blessings of God, according to Genesis chapter 12. Hold on to Ephesians and turn to Genesis chapter 12. And what you find here in Genesis chapter 12 is the blueprint for Gentiles to be blessed. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Notice who's getting blessed here. First, in verse 2, it's the seed of Abraham, right? I will bless thee and make thy name great, thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee. The Gentiles' blessings in time past would flow through the seed of Abraham. If they blessed the seed of Abraham, they would be blessed. If they cursed the seed of Abraham, they would be cursed. So in order for, in time past, for Gentiles to have blessings of God, they would have to be through the nation Israel. It would have to be through that seed that had been promised. So Paul's saying in time past, you weren't part of Israel. You were not blessing Israel. Therefore, you don't receive the blessing. That continued even in Jesus' time. In fact, turn to, turn to Luke Let's look in Luke chapter 7. In Luke chapter 7, verse 1. Now when he had ended all the of the people, he entered into Capernaum. This is, of course, is Jesus. And a certain centurion servant. Now this is a Roman centurion. This is just as a Gentile. This is a Roman Gentile. A Roman who occupied the nation of Israel. The Romans in general were not Israel blessing Gentiles, right? But here's a Roman, a certain centurion servant, who was dear unto him, was sick and ready to die. And unto him the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they besought him instantly, saying that he was worthy of whom he should do this, for he loveth our nation, and he hath built us a synagogue. Why was this Roman centurion worthy of Jesus coming and healing his servant? He blessed Israel. He built him a synagogue. He blessed the seed of Abraham, so he was worthy of receiving a blessing of this person being healed. You see how it worked. Paul's talking to people in Ephesians that wasn't part of this. They had no hope because they were not tied to the nation Israel. That is found all the way through, even in the book of Acts. Look over in Acts chapter 10. In Acts chapter 10, verse 1. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion. Here's another centurion. You know, it's interesting. You think about, there's three, basically, centurions that we just read about one. And then, really, the Philippian jailer was part of that Roman government as well. And the only one, it's not meant, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Look in chapter 10, verse 1. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band called the Italian band, a devout man, and one that feared God with all his house, which gave much alms to the people, and prayed to God always. When it talks about in the Bible that talks about the people, that's Israel. Yeah. Every time it's the people. And so he gave alms to the people, and he prayed to God always. And he saw in a vision, evidently about the 9th hour of the day, an angel of God coming into him, saying unto him, Cornelius. When he looked on him, he was afraid and said, What is it, Lord? And he said unto him, Thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial unto God. Now send men to Joppa and call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. So he goes, and the story here is Peter. The Lord basically has to put Peter in a trance and convince him to go see this man. And Peter didn't want to. In fact, look at what he says when he finally gets there. Look in, let's get down to verse 25. And as Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter took him up, saying, Stand up, I myself also am a man. And as he talked with him, he went in and found many that were come together. And he said unto them, You know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come into one of another nation, but God has showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. He's like, all right, I'm here. It's not lawful for me to be here. There was a separation in time past. And the Jews were not to, they weren't to be part of the Gentiles. Even this guy who feared God and gave alms to the people. There was a difference made. And you have to recognize that there was a difference there. And ultimately, Peter preaches, and these people receive the Holy Ghost and begin speaking in tongues, and just as the Jews did in Acts chapter 2. But there was a change made in Acts chapter in Ephesians. Paul's talking about the fact that he was given something specifically to these Gentiles. He was sent to the Gentiles. He was the apostle of the Gentiles, and we looked at that last week about the fact that he was given this dispensation. But in time past, there was a difference. And we looked at Genesis. Let's just look at a few other things here about this difference. Turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 7. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, let's just start in verse 1. When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land, whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Are they to bring them in and make them part of their nation? You know why? Because they fought against the nation of Israel. So they were to be destroyed. They were to be wiped out. There were to be nothing left of them. Notice what it says. Thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughters shalt not give unto his sons, and his daughters shalt not take unto thy son. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. That's why Peter didn't want to go to the Gentiles. They weren't supposed to intermingle. The Gentiles would lead them astray. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. Thus shall ye deal with them. Ye shall destroy their altars, break down their images, cut down their groves, burn their graven images with fire. For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon all the face of the earth. Who's above? Is everybody equal? No. Israel is the head. They are above all people. Blessings flow through them depending on your relationship with them. If you bless them, or if you didn't, then that depended on that. Look in chapter 10. In Deuteronomy chapter 10. Verse 12, Israel, what doth the Lord thy God require of thee, but to fear the Lord thy God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good. Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens is the Lord's thy God is. Only the Lord had a delight in thy fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, even you above all people, as it is this day. In that day, Israel was above all people. They were above all people. They were given the law to separate themselves from the people. Look back in chapter 4. Look in Deuteronomy chapter 4. Verse 1. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1. Now therefore hearken, O Israel, unto the statutes and unto the judgments which I teach you, for to do them, that you may live and go in and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers hath given you. So that he's given them commandments, he's given them the law. You shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall you diminish aught from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you. They were given the law. Paul was asked a question, what then advantage hath the Jew? And he said, much in every way, because the oracles of God were committed unto them. He gave them the law, and we're going to get ready to read that law was given to them to separate them from everybody else. Look at what it says here. Verse 3, your eyes have seen what the Lord did because of Baal-peor. For all the men that followed Baal-peor, God hath destroyed them from among you. But ye that did cleave unto the Lord your God are alive, every one of you, this day. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that ye should do so in the land, whether you go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say. So when they see Israel keeping the law and the statutes, this is how the nations will respond. This is how God's manner for salvation for Israel, for nations would be. They will see the nation Israel and see their righteousness in this law, and then this is what they will say. Continue verse 6. Surely this great nation is wise, a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath God so nigh to them, as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great, that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law which I set before you this day? They were given them the law to separate them from the rest of the world, to set them apart, that the rest of the world would go to them and bless them and receive the blessings of God. They were given these commandments. And this is the way in which God was dealing with mankind, is through this nation. They were given, look at some of the laws, just really quick. Look at when he gives them dietary laws. There were 614 or 13 laws that they had to keep. Can you imagine? Man. You know, some people act like they've done a great service to God if they can keep 10. All right? Look at some of these dietary laws. Verse 1. Leviticus 11:1. And the Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying unto them, speaking to the children of Israel, saying, these are the beasts which ye shall eat among the beasts that are on the earth, whatsoever parteth the hoof and is cloven-footed and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that shall ye eat. That would be beef. That would be cows, right? That'd be goats. That'd be sheep, right? But he goes on down. You can't eat camel, verse 4. You can't eat rabbits, verse 5 and 6. Verse 7, and the swine, though he divide the hoof and be cloven-footed, yet he cheweth not the cud, he is unclean unto you. Of their flesh shall ye not eat, their carcass shall ye not touch, they are unclean. So they were not allowed to eat pig, bacon, sausage, Boston butt. Didn't get to eat any of that. If you go on down, they couldn't eat. Verse 12. Verse 10. And all they that have fins and scales in the seas and in the rivers, and all that move in the waters, and any living thing which is in the waters, they shall be an abomination unto you. The fish, any fish that didn't have scales, were an abomination. They were not allowed to eat. That would be catfish. That would be shrimp. That would be crabs. All the good stuff. Right? Couldn't eat it. They had these dietary laws. Well, in the dispensation of grace, Paul says in 1 Timothy chapter 4, all things are clean. All the earth is mine, saith the Lord. All things are clean today. There's no dietary laws today. We're in the dispensation of grace. Look at another one. Look over in Deuteronomy chapter 22. And this verse used to be used a lot by strict, legalistic, fundamental Baptists. I've heard it preached. Look in verse 5, Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5. The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are abomination unto the Lord thy God. So that was preached, and women can't wear pants. I've heard it preached. I've had it quoted to me as that. And of course, back in the days when MASH was on TV, it was an abomination that what was his name? Klinger dressed up like a woman because he's trying to get discharged from the army, you know. But when this was written, the robes that men wore were kind of like dresses. You know, I'm just saying. And it's not to us today. We're not in this. This is not our law. And so I had a guy, I was discussing this with a guy one time, and he quoted this verse. And I just kind of said, well, it's Israel, it's the law. And then later on in the conversation, I said, so how's your garden doing? What have you got planted this year? Because I knew he had a garden. Oh yeah, I've got squash, and I've got cucumbers, and I've got I got potatoes, and I got all these different things planted in the garden. And I didn't have a Bible with me at the time, but I said, if you go, the same verse you just quoted me, if you'll go down about 4 verses when you get home, read it. And this is what it says in verse 9. Thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with divers seed, lest the fruit of thy seed which thou hast sown and the fruit of the vineyard be defiled. So you couldn't plant diverse seeds in a field. It was abomination. On and on it goes. Verse 11, thou shalt not wear a garment of divers sorts, as of woolen and linen together. Well, you can't find clothes today that hasn't got 50% this and 50% that in it, unless you make it yourself. And I don't know anybody does that anymore. They get their fabric from somewhere, even if they do make it. They're not out shearing sheep and then making their own clothes. They're not picking cotton and making their own clothes. I don't know anybody is. I'm sure there probably is somewhere. But the fact is that this was Israel's law. This was their. This was how they were to be separate. Look in Exodus. Look back in Exodus chapter 31. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll go here and then we'll stop. We'll finish up. Exodus 31. This was serious business, right? We read here in Exodus 31. 12. Exodus 31:12. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbath shall you keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that does sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people, done but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever doth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. There are people today who claim that today, Sunday, is the Sabbath, and it needs to be a day of rest. If you're following the law, then what does the law say to people who work on the Sabbath?
Kill
They're to die later. They didn't work. They didn't leave their house. They didn't cook meals. Anything. It wasn't that they just come home after church after they've gone out to eat while somebody else has to work to feed them. And then they lay on the couch and say, oh, I'm resting. It's the Sabbath. They didn't do anything. And if they did, they were put to death. Numbers chapter 15, there is a man who wanted to build a fire. He probably got tired of hearing his wife say she was cold. And he walked out and was picking up sticks. That's all the man was doing. And he got put to death. There is a difference. We are in the dispensation of grace. Look at what Paul says about that in Romans, and I will be done, and we'll continue these thoughts next week. In Romans chapter 13. Chapter 14. Romans chapter 14. Notice verse 5. Romans 14:5. One man esteemeth one day above another. Okay? That would be somebody who would think the Sabbath started Friday night at about 6 o'clock and it ended Saturday night at 6 o'clock. That's the Sabbath. It's not Sunday. There's nowhere in the Bible that says that once the Lord resurrected, He resurrected on Sunday, so now Sunday's the Sabbath. There's no verse that says that. But verse 5, one man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day regardeth it unto the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day to the Lord doth he not regard it. And the thing is that if you're going to keep it, then keep it. Don't go out. Don't cook meals, or don't make your wife cook meals. Don't go out to eat so somebody else has to cook. You know what they did? They had their meals already. It was already prepared. They had their animals taken care of. They didn't do anything. They didn't do. They made provisions to not do anything on the Sabbath day. Paul said, be fully persuaded if you want to. And the context here is in verse 1. Him that ye, but not for doubtful disputations. And then he goes on to talk about eating things, which we talked about earlier. There's some that, for one believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. So the one that eateth all things, is he weak? Who's weak? The one that eateth herbs. Why? Because, well, for one thing, he needs some protein. No, because he's talking about the faith. He's weak in the faith. He don't believe that they're established, right? He's weak. Yeah, I better keep this just in case, right? I better not eat this. The same is with the day. If you one esteemeth the day above another, and another esteemeth every day alike, which one of those would be weak in the faith? One who esteemeth the day more than another. They're weak in the faith. Why? Because they won't believe that about what Paul says about the law. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to them that believe. He tells them in Colossians not to be brought into subjection about what you shall eat or drink or respect of a new moon or the Sabbath day. He says that in Colossians chapter 2. But there are people who are weak in the faith. So Paul's saying, don't get in arguments with them. let every man be fully persuaded. If somebody wants to say today's the Sabbath, have at it. But don't judge me, because I don't. And I won't judge. You do whatever you want to do. But if you're going to keep it, keep it. Don't say you're keeping it and you're really not, is the thing. But anyway, I digress. We'll stop there for now, and we'll kick this up again a little bit next week.